Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for having me back. The last time I was in this building was as a pastor at the Pastors Conference, and so we were in Wisconsin and would come up here periodically for that. I served under Michael Bullmore, who some of you would know and has always been a friend of Bethlehem, and so it's just a joy to be back in this capacity. I see undergraduates here. I'm so glad you are here. And undergraduates come to my office as dean and ask me questions about should they take this class or have that emphasis or that minor. My undergraduate degree is in engineering. And that's how God prepared me to be a dean of theology. So just relax. Life is endlessly interesting. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about this topic. And I'm excited that you would come as Christians and want to engage about economics. Okay, because the world of economics is changing dramatically around us. We don't have to talk about the internet or self-driving cars. Tonight we're going to talk about apples and chickens. Okay, things that are profoundly better than ever before in history, so that it's the job of every generation to apply eternal truth into its own generation, into its own cultural situation. And that is, in an economic sense, more difficult than ever before. And 10 years from tonight, I'm confident this will be a more important topic than it is tonight. So I think you're here on the ground floor. So this is actually some lectures, or part of lectures from a class I teach called The Theology of Work, Time, and Money at Colorado Christian University, or selected slides on why Christians should be transdisciplinary. And in fact, let me just tell you what we're going to do tonight. I only have, after this slide, one slide of content. Okay, so my goal tonight is to define the language of enterprise. What does that mean? Then to give you examples, and that'll be the bulk. So it's how do we see the world through the lenses of accounting, through demographics, through finance, and so forth, through the lens of economics. These are tools that need to serve the church in this generation in ways that prior generations didn't need them. And then I'm going to leave time at the end for some questions and answers. So here's my goal. My goal is to encourage Christians like you, and particularly of all ages, but particularly undergraduates, towards transdisciplinarity. Okay, transdisciplinarity for the glory of God. That means keep hold of your biblical studies, keep hold of your theology, keep hold of those essentials, and make sure that we're learning in other fields. So there's a whole movement to get Christians in there to study at the graduate level in seminary and in another field. And so in my case, that would be economics. And so why are we doing this? Because it's practical. Okay, and practical might be, well, it's good for a pastor to know a little bit of accounting because they'll have a church budget. Well, that's true. Or maybe it's practical to know a little bit about your retirement account so that you know how to invest. That's true. It's practical to study under Dave Ramsey. Do that. It's very practical, but that's not where we're going tonight. We want to go to the philosophical level, okay, to more of a theoretical. What does it mean, money? What does it mean to invest and so forth? And this is in red, not just because I know where I am, okay, but because that really was on this slide. I just made it red for tonight. We want this to be doxological. So, and in fact, this is an older version that I sent to Zach, so I actually corrected the typo there. So sorry about that. We want this to end up in worship. Okay, so one of the reasons I think you should study economics or finance or accounting in addition to your biblical studies is because God is not being worshiped enough. And if we can look at the world through these lenses, then we will worship God more. And I know where I am, and so you know about microscopes that make unimportant things big, and telescopes that make big things that seem small to see what they really are. I really think that we need now tools, lenses like economics, so that we can see the world as it is. So let's just go back 200 years. And then from 1810, before the Industrial Revolution, back to the time of Jesus. And from the time of Jesus back to the time of Abraham, that means 80% of the people in the room would just be subsistence farmers or married to a subsistence farmer. And so when you talk about your life, you would know your life is very much like your life is very much like your life or the wife of your life. Okay, there was a great deal of homogeneity in the church and in the kingdom of God. That's not true anymore, and it will never be true again. And so now we need to understand, how do we see this new and expanding world? So let's go on and define these fields and then give you an example. So when we talk about the language at enterprise, what I mean is the field of accounting. Okay, and what do accountants do? Think about it as looking at the past. They will tell you what has happened last year or 2 years ago or a 5-year trend. And they'll tell you in great detail from invoices and records and things like that. It takes a certain type of person to make all the columns add up and be happy at the end of the day. And accounting is very useful. Now, was accounting useful 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago? In some sense. But today, Walmart employs 2.2 million people. 2.2 million people is the largest non-military organization in the history of mankind. To get 2.2 million people to coordinate, to agree, to work together, that requires accountants who can track expenses, because when people do things, it costs money, it leaves records, it sends signals. And so just to keep track, even that this church has $1 million budget, multi-million, many multi-million. This is just not the way the church was in the time of the Apostle Paul, not even in Corinth. And so hopefully you'll say that, yeah, churches need to manage that. And accountants are the ones who help them do that with good stewardship. It's a tool to serve the church, and we need Christians who are pursuing that. Okay, on the other end, we have finance. Okay, and I have taught both graduate finance and graduate accounting, and people sometimes say, oh, those are just all the same. It deals with dollar signs. Okay, finance is not the same. Yeah, I see, yeah, people who know. Finance is about the future, not about the past. It's about amassing enough cash. It's about cash in certain payments, in certain intervals in time. And so I was very good at this. Financial analysts wave their hands around a lot, and they show lots of pictures to people about how the future is going to be if you invest and if you stay with us and so forth. The accountants are the ones who tell you what really happened. The financial analyst is on to the next thing to tell you. See, there's a difference. And now finance is important because we have compound interest. Okay, never before in the history of mankind. And when I say that, that's not like hyperbole. That's like true. That, okay, in this generation you have compound interest and access to compound interest that didn't exist when the church was building cathedrals. They're just like, we're just going to spend our entire lifetime building this cathedral and we won't get it done. And then people after us will spend their entire lifetimes and they won't get it done. Okay, that's not the same thing as finance. We'll talk more about that. So this is not computer information systems. We're not sure what they do, but so we have a programmer over here. So reporting to a plant controller at Ford Motor Company, who is an accountant, accounting supervisor over a department, finance supervisor, and computer information systems. And then also we want to talk about demographics, okay? The trends of people making choices both in general and in specific. And so demographics are the human element of this. And economics you can think about as over all of these. How do people make decisions based on the past, looking toward the future in situations of scarcity? Okay, so this is what economists think about. And it's not dismal, okay? So it's actually very exciting. Trust me, I'll get there. So, but it also is underneath biblical anthropology. So one of the interesting things for me is to go to economic conferences and they do a study about whether $1 to a rich person is worth as much as $1 to a poor person. Okay, does money buy happiness? They study. What's so helpful to be able to read the Bible, right? And to have categories like sin and greed and things like that that we have as Christians, whereas economists just say we don't have solutions. And economists will say, I can just tell you the trade-offs. If you choose this, you'll have that. If you choose this, you'll have that. But there's no fundamental answer. So, okay, so these are the fields. Let me just tell you just an opening example about Natisha. So 7 a.m. Monday morning, I was walking into my office, and Natisha followed me and said, can we talk? And so I thought, well, it's kind of unusual on Sunday morning, on a Monday morning, and I have a final to give and so forth. But I said, sure. And she said, what's your passion? 7:02 Monday morning. And I said, to teach Christ crucified for the glory of God in all the nations. And then she said, what's your calling? I said, well, right now I'm a dean of theology. And then she said, she started asking other questions like, well, when did you get that passion? And how do you know that's your calling? And then I realized it's finals week. And she's a freshman. And she's kind of nervous. And so I just kind of said, what are you studying? She said, I'm studying accounting. And to cut it short, I just said, I learned in my schooling a few things. And one of them is, don't change your major in finals week, okay? Okay, and not even 2 weeks before finals week. I just said, take your final today, go sleep for 2 days, and then pray about it. And if you want to change away from accounting, that's okay, okay? But not today. And don't ask about passion and call. Just go take your final, okay? And then we'll think about it. But then we talked a little bit, because she did not have a good lens, this broader lens of what is accounting. She was very practical about it, okay, but she hadn't thought about it philosophically. And so I asked her the practical question, what do accountants generally make when they graduate? And she said, about $50,000 a year. That's fair. But she had never thought about the rest of her life, that she was going to be working from 22 to 70 when Social Security will come in for her. That's 48 years. And so she hadn't thought about the fact that her lifetime earnings was $2.4 million, okay? Not including inflation, but not adjusted for her raises and productivity and so forth. So she didn't realize the amount of human capital that she represented as she was standing there. Does that make sense? Okay, and what was fascinating to me, as you see, she was a woman. And if you will, she was black. And I just asked her, what would be your prospects 100 years ago? What would be your prospects 200 years ago? Okay, in 1810. It's like she was nervous about her exam, but just to be there and to be in this society is an unprecedented opportunity for a person like her and for people like us. Does that make sense? This is the broader lens of accounting that I want us to see, not at the practical level, but at a philosophical level. And not only that, she hadn't thought about the financial lens. Okay, this is compound interest. So if you just save a $20 bill under your pillow, you'll have $20. Or where's Ross? Less, because the Federal Reserve will inflate it away. Okay, but that's okay. But if you have simple interest, but compound interest, this is the thing that she can command through Vanguard for $500 in her retirement account. She had a coffee. And I just looked at her and thought, that's a $3.25 in your hand right there as you're drinking that coffee. And if you instead took that $3.25 every day and invested it at a market rate of return, the stock market about 9%, she's 19 till she's 70, that's 51 years, and you would have a $1.1 million, largely because of compound interest. That's not a trick. That's just the way compound interest works. But in Africa, in South America, 200 years ago, no people like us had access to instruments that could give you compound interest like that. And so she just took her final, but I wanted to talk to her about this. I'm like, you would see the world differently about that coffee, all right? Or what you do every day for $3 if you thought, this is $1 million I could give away to a church, to people, or retire on 70 years from now. That's why we need these tools. That's why this generation needs these tools. Here it is. So this is why it's hard. This is the compound interest formula. It is a specialty, but here's the picture, and it looks like this. So, but I wanted to talk to her more. This is the economics of her life. The economics is that up until 1810, until the Industrial Revolution, most people were born, and the life expectancy at birth was 26 years. Okay, this room would be depopulated, okay, before the Industrial Revolution. Most people entered the workforce at 4, as soon as you could do anything of a contribution, and you would work about 72 hours. When it was light, 6 days a week, you'd be working. So that's 82,000 hours in a lifetime, an economist will tell you. Or you could think about it that this person would be working 54%, more than half of your working life would be working just to subsist. Okay, now if we go to 1900, this is my grandfather's life. After 8th grade education, he entered the workforce. Okay, he retired at 65 with Social Security. He died at 68. That was average. Okay, so in his lifetime, he was working on a farm about 60 hours a week, not as much as before the Industrial, or 162,000 hours. Twice as many hours, but more than twice as much life. It was better. He was working about 41% of his waking hours. But the freshman in accounting today has a life expectancy around 80 years, will maybe get around to the workforce at 20-ish, okay, depending, and could retire at 62. Social Security has moved up into that. And the average work week in the United States, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is 35 hours. That's the average person working. So in total, you get 75,000 hours. Half of my grandfather, less than pre-industrial revolution, but that's in a lot less life to do that. So the average person today is going to spend 16% of your time working, because you enter the workforce later, you retire sooner, and you work fewer hours. And so we need to tell this generation, you are responsible for those hours. All right? It's never been easier. It's hard, but it's never been easier. Okay? So the leisure hours, what's left over not working, were 69,000. For my grandfather, almost 250,000. For Natisha, 391,000 hours not in the workplace. Every hour of which we will give an accounting to God. Okay. And if that makes an impact on you, that's my point tonight. That economics, finance, and accounting serve as lenses for us to reflect as Christians. Okay? Because we're not just practical, we're thinking philosophically and theoretically about it. That's just my opening example. By the way, this is where you are in case you weren't clear. So, this is you. So, all right. So, what do we want to do? Encourage people toward transdisciplinary to think about these new lenses, the practical, the philosophical, and the doxological level for these areas. So let's go. The not dismal thing. Oh, by the way, what is the population today? Did anyone check?
7 billion.
7 billion. Do you believe him? More? That's a lot of noses. What's that? 7. Yeah, I checked this morning, and it was 7.5 billion people on the planet. Okay, that's just a good number to know. God knows them all by name, and he counts their hair. And for some people, it's easier than others. Okay, so the question for us, for demographic and from an economic standpoint, is how did we get there? So here we have in billions of people, and here we have history from the beginning of time. This would be Adam and Eve expressed in billions. Okay, here we have the time of Abraham, roughly, the time of King David, roughly, the Roman Empire, time of Christ, the Crusades were starting here. This was just after the Black Death, and here's the iPad. So you have the pyramids right in here, the iPad over here. And so when we think about how the world progressed, at the time around Abraham, there were 26 million people spread over the entire globe. That would be about the population of, under the population of California. Okay. By the time of King David, the population had doubled, quite a feat, to 50 million people. still about the population of France. By the time of Christ, it was just over 250 million. But look at this billion mark. When did we first get 1 billion people in the world for the first time? Okay, it wasn't at the Crusades. It was around the Industrial Revolution, this 1810 figure that I keep mentioning. Okay, that's when we crossed the billion mark, and now there are 7.5 billion. So let's look at this broken down by billion. So depending on the beginning, there's at least 4,000 years for the first billion, a little over a century for the second billion, a third of a century for the third, 15 years for the fourth, 13, 12, 12, right? I have a 17-year-old daughter. She turns 17 this Tuesday. And there's been more than 1 billion people added to the planet in her lifetime, okay? Since I was born, the planet has doubled in population, okay? It was a lot easier to find parking places when I was 16, okay, than there is today. And so when you look at this is audience participation. What comes to mind when you look at this chart? Just call out a word or whatever. Yes, Micah?
Population growth crisis.
Population growth crisis. Okay. What else?
Human flourishing.
Okay, so we've narrowed it down. It's either a crisis or great. Okay. So let's go to this section over here to break the tie.
Food.
Food. What about food?
We'll have to feed.
Are we going to run out of food? That's a lot of people. So think of all the hamburgers if you gave everybody. So
Lots of souls.
lots of souls
Yeah.
that are going to go to heaven or not. Okay, interesting. So I've shown this on 3 continents because nobody argues. This is not controversial Christian secret data. This is from the UN. And the number one experience, people look at this and say, this is terrible. We're going to run out of food. We're going to run out of water. How are we going to clothe all these people and things like that? This is terrible. Okay. I want to argue, as Christians, you want to look at this and say, these are souls that worship God or not, okay? Or through the lens of economics, these are markets. These are houses and cars and shoes that we can make and sell to all these people. This is fundamentally good news, okay? Not scary news. And this is why we need an economic lens and Christianity. So run out of food, run out of water, pollute the whole planet, just no place to go, or just totally full, something like that. Let's just address these quickly in turn. So starting, will we run out of food with 7.5 billion people? All right, this is where the geeky economics comes in, all right? Like this chart. So from 1966 to 98, so this gold line is that exponential you just saw. We flattened it out to make it easier to see. And the blue line is the rate of production of wheat and barley and other grains. And you'll see it's consistently above the population line. And the meat line is consistently above that. What does this mean? It means that we are growing food faster than people are reproducing. Okay? There is, in fact, more food today per person than there was 20 years ago, even though we have 7.5 billion. And in fact, it's been over 10 years that the United Nations said there's enough food for everybody. There's enough food for everybody to have 2,000 calories a day. Okay? Now, economics doesn't solve the problem of the human heart. That's the gospel. Only the gospel does that. God uses the church. So are there still hungry people? Yes. Where there is sin, where there is war, where there are distribution problems, there are still hungry people today. But it's not been before, again, this is the same phrase, in the history of humankind that there was enough food for everybody. Okay, it's a dramatic improvement. So, in fact, if you don't believe me, just trust me that food costs less today than ever before. Okay, now some of you are thinking, No, it's not, because I just bought a loaf of bread and it's $3, and my grandfather used to pay a nickel. Okay, so what is he talking? That's the nominal prices. So we want to use a lens from economics called the time-wage lens. Okay, to use human life as the currency. So how much does food cost in human life? And let's just use our 3.5-pound frying chicken. Okay, so in 1920, it took the average person at the average wage 2 hours to purchase a chicken. And so, may I ask, ma'am, how old you might be? I can't ask.
She's 39.
39. 94. So my grandmother is 96, and so she raised chickens because it made economic sense to actually raise the bird than to go work for the bird. Okay, does that make sense? And so, but by 1970, it only took 12 minutes for the average laborer at the average wage to buy a 3.5-pound fryer. Okay, so the cost in human life went down more than 80%. And today, what do you think? This is the guy, he's on his little walking desk because he doesn't get enough exercise like these people. And so today, a chicken costs the average person 6 minutes. And that's why nobody buys chickens like this anymore. They buy their chickens like this because you don't have to get out of your car when you go by. Okay? So it made economic sense for my grandmother. Even in 1928, remember the presidential slogan? A chicken in every pot. That was a rare thing. And this is not 100 years ago. Okay? Now it's fundamentally different. Chickens are cheaper and more abundant. And in fact, chickens are better. Here's some geeky biology for you. So here's our chicken today. Here's my grandma's chicken. Okay, not really. It's like a model of my grandma's chicken. So in 1930, the average chicken went to market at 2.5 pounds. In 2015, the average chicken goes to market at 6.25. So the bird is more than twice as big, okay, to have the chicken. And my grandma's chicken took 45 days to add a pound. So in other words, it was 100 days to raise a chicken this big. Today, you can raise a chicken this big. They gain a pound almost a week. So you can get a bird twice as big in half the time. It's a better chicken. Now, I love this example because people think, oh, iPhones, that's so high-tech, and satellites and self-driving cars. Just your chicken is better, okay? It's just better than any chicken ever before.
It's not going to get in the Baseball Hall of Fame, though.
Yeah, that's true. So, on the other hand, again, this isn't the gospel. Economics doesn't solve problems of sin. And so sometimes problems create problems. And so I'm not saying the world is all better, but people 100 years ago would rather eat a bigger bird than not. Okay, so let's talk about apples. So this, so another, not that computer thing, phone, whatever, that kind of apple. Okay, and you remember this expression, low-hanging fruit? Start with the low-hanging fruit. My point here is that used to make sense, and now it doesn't make sense anymore. It's what's changed even about apples in your generation. And so this is the number of mentions of low-hanging fruit in the New York Times compared to popular phrases such as easy pickings, easy as pie, shooting fish in a barrel. Those have not changed, but suddenly low-hanging fruit is suddenly a very popular expression. And I would say it's not even meaningful anymore. Because when you pick a fruit tree, you put the ladder at the top and you don't pick from the bottom. Right? If you only pick the low-hanging fruit, you get fired. You got to pick the whole tree. And you don't pick the low-hanging fruit first because then you carry it up the tree with you. You start at the top, you pick the high fruit, and then you work your way down the tree. But in your generation, we have to ask the question, why do we need a ladder for the tree? So over the last 30 years, we have bred fruit trees to be the size of people. So now you don't pick the low-hanging fruit because it's an ergonomic problem. You just pick all the easy fruit. And so the labor involved of picking apples, which is a big cost, part of the cost of an apple, is lower than ever before. Okay? The apples are now bigger and it costs less to get them than ever before. But wait, you say, won't we starve eating off these little dwarf trees? No, because dwarf trees can be put 2,000 per acre. And you could only, the big tall 30-foot trees only fit 25 per acre. So now you have more trees producing more apples per acre with less labor. So you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that your chicken is better, your apple is better, so that people are doing better and we're not going to run out of food. Okay. What about water? Will we run out of water? No, we're not even going to talk about that because we have a recipe for water. Do you notice 3/4 of the planet is covered with water? All you have to do is be able to desalinate it, and we know how to do that, and we have to be able to transport it. That's just an energy problem, and we'll talk about energy later. So as long as you have energy, you'll never run out of water. What about polluting the whole world? By the way, I had to look hard to find this picture of pollution, because if you just type air pollution into Google Images, do you know what comes up? Steam. That white stuff you see coming out of smokestacks, that's all scrubbed. It's not pollution, that's just water vapor. It's hard to find a picture of actual real pollution. Anyway, that's just different than it was before. Let me pick up the pace here. This is from the EPA, which is great, from 1980, standard. So gross domestic product has gone up, more than doubled. By 2006, vehicles travel twice as much. The population in the United States is up 30% since 1980. Our energy consumption is up less than the population, but pollution, according to the EPA, is down almost 50%. So it turns out that industrialized economies actually have the lowest levels of pollution. Okay, that's true around the world. When we talk about, that's pollution in general. When you talk about ozone, carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, which makes acid rain, or lead, which harms children and things like that, even in the component parts, lead is down to very low levels and so forth. So as components, and then this is actually a trend of deaths by pollution. So not just the surrogate of sulfur dioxide in the air, but how many people are dying of that, and that is way down. So again, I'm not saying economics is the gospel. Jesus Christ is the gospel, but this is better than it was 30 years ago and 50 years ago. And the car was one of the best pollution control devices ever. New York City had to haul away 30,000 tons of manure every day when horses were the primary. And manure is full of fleas and germs. That's a pollution that will kill you. They went to high lead levels, which was not great, and now we've gotten rid of that. Again, cars pollute less than any other mode of transportation. So, all right, what about people? I like people. It's better. Let's go to the next slide. The bottom line here, this is the price of commodities, oil, wood, lead, tin, molybdenum, industrial, things like that. The index is lower. The index is lower with 7 billion people than with 2 billion people. So here's the bottom line. The inflation-adjusted cost of commodities has been declining over the long term, indicating a greater abundance relative to population. In other words, we're finding more of those things and making them more useful faster than the rate of population growth. Okay, this is not secret Christian mythical data. And in fact, where do we find things expensive? During World War II and the Korean conflict. The OPEC oil embargo, for example, the Gulf War was a problem. And so sin is a problem. Okay? Otherwise, in the absence of those cataclysms, the prices of things are going down. And that means less human life is spent on them. This is commodity prices. Oh, this is oil. This is, yeah. Remember when oil was $4 a gallon? Now it's $2. They found more of it, and relative to people using it. So what's the main point? The point is the Stone Age did not end because they ran out of stones. Okay, so we have plenty of those. They found better things than stones, in bronze, and then iron, and then aluminum, and then titanium. And here's the message from all of that data to remember for tonight. People are primarily minds and not mouths. In the Bible, we see that human beings are made in the image of God. They solve problems and they serve other people. They're not mouths that consume more resources than they create. So this is the biblical anthropology overlaid over the economics, overlaid over the data. And if we see the world this way, you will not be afraid of that population slide. So you know this is true, by the way, not just biblically, but from your own experience. So, well, actually, my son's getting married in 2 days, so the possibility of a granddaughter is very real for me. I'm very excited about this, okay? And if you think about my granddaughter to be, she's pretty mouthy, right? Okay, there's a lot of mouth, there's a lot of problems, they cause a lot of problems, babies take lots of resources, but they grow up to graduate from Colorado Christian University and Bethlehem and so forth. People are minds more than they are mouths for the majority of their lives. And so what happens if we get this wrong? What happens if we think people are mostly mouths instead of minds, contrary to the biblical witness? Well, we have an experiment. China said that the way to solve the resource problem is to eliminate people. Okay, and so we have the one-child policy, the propaganda that this was the best thing for the world, and it's turned out to be a disaster in baby girls, right, who were aborted from sex-selective abortion or infanticide after they were born. Because if you think that mouths are the problem, then this is the solution. And we as Christians say that's horrific. That can't be. These are mothers. These are the mothers who only had one child and whose children were killed in an earthquake. And so they're like, who is going to take care of us? Because that was the only child we ever could have had. Okay, so the bottom line here is that ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have victims. And those victims are often women and the poor. Okay. And so that is why, as Christians, we need to think about the world rightly through economics, through finance, through accounting. So let's just go and think about that people. So this is Genesis 1:28. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature on the ground. So when we look at that, be fruitful and multiply, and then we say, there it is. We're finally getting around to what human beings were supposed to do. This is actually flourishing. This is fundamentally good news. But that multiply isn't just like breed like rabbits, okay? That the rest of the Bible from Genesis onward refines that to say things like, raise your children in the training and instruction of the Lord. Just don't breed them, but raise them. Or at the woman at the well, Jesus talks about the Father is seeking worshipers in spirit and in truth, okay? We're to raise those. Or the Great Commission, I don't have to say that here, go and make disciples, as you said. This is a huge opportunity. This is fundamentally good news, okay, with world population today. Now, also we have fill the earth, and so that was a command fundamentally, and we find that here it is at night, and there's places that are unoccupied at night. If you can see this, human beings are the only creatures to occupy every climate zone. You have polar bears, but not in the desert. And you have savanna animals, but not in the swamps. But you have human beings that have inhabited every climate zone, though you're not really suited for any of them, perhaps. Certainly not Minnesota, okay? But here you are. And so I think this is responding to God's fundamental command. This is part of biblical anthropology. So rule over the fish of the sea and every living creature. And if you just take a kid and put him in the room with books and a puppy, there's just no comparison. The kid knows what to do. You don't have to be a rancher to subdue creation and rule over animals. You can do it with your little goldfish. There's something in human beings, like Onyx. You talked about Onyx. I tell her, I'm dominating you. I'm ruling over you. And she's like, does this mean food? Because if it does, I really like being dominated. And this is great. And there's no other species where you have this, right? This is biblical anthropology that the dog, responds. And I like the dog. He gets Christmas presents. Right? Okay. So we have this other thing. So we multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. And so this subdue is a really important word, kavash. It doesn't mean pollute and despoil. It means to make it pay tribute, make it useful. And so here we have a guy subduing the earth, right? He's chopping it up and planting it, and it's yielding a tribute of his crops. And so you can argue with a John Deere tractor, we're better at subduing the earth than ever before. Okay? How many people here are subduing the earth this week? Couple? What did you do to subdue the earth today, Lila?
I am subduing this yarn into something else.
Did you catch that? You guys, this is a smart student. How are you subduing the earth?
Well, there's silicon chips, and I use them to automate things.
You guys don't need this lecture. You guys are on it. This is huge. So, she's subduing that yarn into what is it going to be?
It's going to be a baby dress.
And a little baby, how cool is that? So that's cool. And silicon from sand is now serving people with digits. Okay. I used to work at Ford, and when we would take steel, now aluminum and rubber and silica sand, and here's where the accounting comes in. How do you know you're subduing the earth? Okay, how do you know you're making it useful? All right, this is what we want to think about. So when someone will pay you in a free market transaction, the signal is it's useful. And when you sum up how much of creation you've used in materials and life of human beings, that accountants will call you is the cost of goods sold. Okay, that's how much material and life you've used. And so what's the difference between these? It's an honest profit. And I would submit to you that an honest profit is a measure of our obedience to the creation mandate. Okay, so I don't mean stealing someone's purse on the way out tonight. Okay, it's not just getting money, it's actually creating wealth. It's creating a free market transaction where people say, that is more useful than iron ore. Because we have, of course, the counterexample, the Pontiac. Okay, the Pontiac Aztec. How many people have seen a Pontiac Aztec? You'll never forget it. It's in your brain. You see that. People basically said, that is not more useful than iron ore. Okay? That is not more useful than sand. We want our beach back. Okay? And so the revenue was lower than the cost of making it. And in free markets, they don't make them anymore. Do we have an amen? Okay, so you see the point. This is a little bit controversial, but if we are all farmers, 90% agrarian and married to farmers, then you'd know if you were subduing the earth. Your children aren't starving. But in a more complex society, we need signals, and a profit, an honest profit, is one of those signals. Revenue in a free transaction is that. Now, we'll talk later in Q&A about fraud and deceit and sin. Okay, I'm not saying this solves the problem that only the gospel solves through the local church. But nonetheless, now this is an important signal back to those fundamental commands that we have. And as a result, here is the trend of income per person in the world. And so you'll see BC 1000, here's the time of Christ, and here's the time of the Crusades, roughly. And so the income per person really didn't change until here. And today it's 12 times higher than ever before. Okay, and that is average. So that's the poorest countries in the world with the United States on the average is 12. In here, it's more than 100 times higher than this subsistence level where everybody used to live. So let's just think about this. The Apostle Paul lived right here. And when he wrote, he was talking about, we don't have time for this, but people who are living below subsistence, like prisoners and lepers and orphans and widows, people who lived at unstable subsistence, able-bodied, but they were one crop away from starving. Stable subsistence means if my crop fails this year, I have enough seed for one more. You notice I've just covered 3/4 of the people with a surplus, like soldiers or tradespeople with inventory, imperial elites were only 3% of the people during the time of Paul. So when you watch a movie about the Roman Empire and they're wearing white togas and they're walking around in marble statuary and stuff, that for every one of those, there were 97 other people out there just scratching a living. That's not our experience. I don't know who the poorest person in this room is, but you're better off than, and you have even the imperial elites didn't have Novocaine. So, I mean, that's a big deal, at least in my life. So Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas, the scholastics, not much happened from the time of Paul. Here we have the Reformation, not much had happened. Here we have Richard Baxter, the Puritans, not much had happened. And you're here. This is why we're talking about this. This is why I'm glad you are talking about this. This is why this is going to be more important 10 years from today, because it's just different. And it's something that we need to apply eternal truth to. All right, so let me wrap this up with global poverty. This is when I was in high school. Half the world was in extreme poverty, under $1.90 a day. 2010, it's 22%. 2 years ago, it was under 10%. It's not enough to end global poverty anymore. The Economist magazine projects that it's going to be, almost to zero by 2030. The question now is, how do we help people flourish? How do we help them know God, be human in the image of God, and so forth? The world is fundamentally changing. And this was not contemplated by Paul, Aquinas, Calvin, or Baxter. Household wealth just surpassed $93 trillion in the United States. That's net wealth. Never before, here it is again, never before in the history of mankind has one nation ever been as wealthy as this one. Now, that's Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, but to live at the poverty level today is to live equal to the middle class of 1970. Okay, you saw my picture of the 1970s. So that's where poverty is defined in the United States today. So I'm not saying there's not suffering, and I'm not saying the church doesn't have work to do, but the average person, it's never been this way before. All right, another slide about declining world poverty and wealth and life expectancy. It's probably a very interesting slide, I'm sure. So here's what we want to say, that God is, through Christ, redeeming people. That's the gospel, that's the work of the church. But like never before, creation is being restored. The effects of the curse are being pushed back. And so that's why I think you should be transdisciplinary and celebrate slides like this. So with that, I was supposed to end at 55 after, and Zach was going to come up and sit on the chair. How fun.